The fire started small, but I could already feel the heat on my skin. In just seconds, the dry grass turned into a wall of flames. I ran toward my orchard, but it was too late. My trees were burning. I yelled for help, but no one came. The HOA had ignored every warning I gave them. They thought they could do whatever they wanted, but they didn't realize how far I'd go to make them pay. What would you do if the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones who caused the damage? I've lived in this neighborhood longer than most of the people in it. My orchard, it's been in my family since the 1942nd. My grandfather planted the first citrus trees, and my dad expanded it with almonds. I spent my childhood climbing those branches, falling out of a few of them, and later teaching my daughter Ellie how to spot ripe fruit just by its color, not touch. We didn't just grow trees, we grew memories. I'll never forget the first time I brought Ellie to the orchard. She was barely old enough to hold a basket, but I watched her carefully pluck fruit from the trees just like I did with my father all those years ago. That orchard meant something more than just the fruit. It was part of us. It was my legacy, and now it was Ellie's too. But everything changed after the HOA elections last year. Suddenly, the board wasn't made up of longtime residents like it used to be. Now, it was a new crew, ambitious newcomers. The new HOA president, Cheryl Langford, was an insurance adjuster who had moved to the neighborhood just a few years ago. She had big plans to improve the neighborhood, starting with her vision of the perfect community. Cheryl wasn't just about appearance. She was about control. It was her way or no way. Her right to set the rules for the entire community didn't come with any respect for history or the people who'd built this place from the ground up. Her obsession with conformity left little room for anyone to argue. And then there was the rest of the board. Karen Mallister, the treasurer, who constantly worried about keeping up appearances and making sure everyone's lawn looked identical. And the guy who sold solar panels, always lecturing us on property aesthetics while trying to make a buck. They didn't care about the history of the land. They didn't care about the families who had been here for decades. To them, it was all about control, about keeping up appearances and doing things on the cheap. And it didn't take long for me to realize that they didn't give a damn about the rules. I'm not the kind of guy who gets easily riled up. After all, I spent years as a firefighter. I've seen enough wildfires to know when things are getting out of hand. But when I saw Cheryl and her board dragging burn barrels up to the boundary line of my orchard during a county-wide fire ban, no less, I knew this was trouble. I tried to warn them. "You know there's a full fire ban, right?" I asked, walking over as calmly as I could, trying not to sound like I was about to lose it. Cheryl, standing there with her clipboard, barely looked up. "We have a maintenance exemption," she said, dismissing me as if I was overreacting. I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, you don't," I said. "There's no exemption for open burns right now. The county's clear on this." I showed her the PDF from the fire marshal's office, clear as day. But it didn't matter. They didn't care. Instead of backing down, Cheryl gave me a tight smile. "We'll double-check," she said, flicking her hand like she was brushing me aside. I knew she didn't believe a word I said. She thought she was above the rules. The next morning, I walked out to my orchard and saw scorch marks on the grass near my trees. It was bad enough that they had ignored my warnings, but now they were actually damaging my land. I checked my irrigation line. Ashes covered part of it. They had done this. But still, no apology, no acknowledgement, no nothing. I knew I had to do something about it. So, I did what I've always done. I fought back the only way I knew how. I documented everything. I called the county. I gathered evidence. They thought they were above the law. They thought they could do whatever they wanted. But they didn't realize how far I'd go to make them pay. I'd been warning them for days, but I knew the real storm was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just be my orchard at risk, it would be theirs too. The days dragged on after that. The HOA didn't seem to care that they had almost burned my orchard down. Cheryl and her crew kept doing their thing, acting like I was some kind of nuisance. Every time I saw them near my property, dragging more propane tanks and gas canisters toward the boundary, I could feel the anger building up inside me. I was no stranger to fire, but this felt different. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a wildfire I couldn't control. This was negligence, pure and simple. I'd warned them more than once, but they didn't listen. They thought their HOA bylaws meant they could do whatever they wanted, that the rules didn't apply to them. One morning, I found scorch marks in the tall grass near the edge of my orchard. I checked my irrigation lines, and there it was, the unmistakable burn pattern. The HOA had started something they couldn't stop. They'd gone behind my back, done it anyway, and now it was spreading. There was no denying it anymore. I called the county again, filed a complaint, and even got my neighbor Mike, who runs a drone photography business, to send over footage. Sure enough, there it was, HOA staff laughing, lighting fires in the brush, and not a care in the world. I sent it all photos, drone footage, even a time-stamped email to the board, hoping they'd get the message. But still, nothing. Not a single apology. No calls, no acknowledgement. I was done asking politely. I was done playing by the rules. And then the wind shifted. The Santa Ana winds. I knew them well. They come out of nowhere, a dry heat that slams you in the face like a brick wall. I'd seen these winds turn a spark into an inferno in seconds. The moment I felt the air change, I knew it was bad. I ran outside, barefoot, adrenaline pumping as I looked toward my orchard. And then I saw it flames. Not the slow creeping kind, but a wave of fire racing across the dry grass. The wind pushed it forward faster than any hose could handle. My orchard was gone. The trees I'd worked so hard to protect. Gone in seconds. I grabbed the hose and tried to put it out, but the pressure was too low. Damn, HOA had reduced our water flow for conservation. The irony didn't hit me until it was too late. My own land, my own trees, and I couldn't even defend them. I yelled for Ellie to grab the emergency kit, but I knew it was hopeless. I watched as the first almond tree caught fire, split in half, and fell like a broken limb. My heart sank. It wasn't just the orchard burning. It was everything I'd worked for. The land, the memories, the years of hard work, everything turned to ash before my eyes. The smoke was thick, choking me, but I kept fighting. I refused to give up. My hands were numb, my body exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop, but it wasn't just my orchard anymore. No, the fire had started to move. The wind was relentless. It pushed the flames toward the HOA's precious sports field, something they'd spent years maintaining, a symbol of their so-called perfect community. And now it was about to go up in flames. I don't know why it gave me any satisfaction to see it. Maybe it was because they'd ignored me for so long. Or maybe it was because for the first time they were going to feel what it was like to lose something they valued. I didn't want this to happen, but I couldn't stop it. And deep down I knew that for once the universe was giving them a taste of their own medicine. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was that as I stood there helpless to save anything, I saw Cheryl, Karen, and the rest of the HOA board standing at the edge of the sports field staring at the fire. They were still in denial. Cheryl was on the phone, pacing back and forth. Karen was talking in circles, trying to reassure the others that everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. The fire was already on their property. Their perfect little community where they thought they could control everything was being torn apart by something they thought they could control. Something they didn't even bother to understand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over there and say I told you so. But I didn't. I couldn't. The fire had already said everything I needed to say. And as the flames crept closer to their buildings, all I could think about was how long it had taken for them to listen. How many warnings they'd ignored. How much damage they'd caused before they even realized it was too late. By the time the fire reached the HOA's sports field, it was out of control. The wind had picked up, pushing the flames faster than any fire crew could manage. I stood there helpless, watching as the fire tore through the manicured grass. The place they thought was untouchable, now it was burning. Cheryl and her board were in full panic mode. Cheryl, who had always acted like she was above the rules, was frantically making phone calls, her voice tight with desperation. Karen was pacing, hands wringing, but it was too late. The fire had already moved beyond their control. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to see their property go up in flames. But they had ignored every warning I'd given them, thought they were invincible. Now the fire was their reckoning. My phone rang. It was Caleb, an old firefighter buddy. "Sam," he said, "the fire marshal's on his way. I'll be there soon. Stay put." I hung up and looked around. The fire had already consumed the HOA's sports field, and now the flames were creeping toward their clubhouse, their pride and joy. When Caleb arrived, I showed him everything: photos, drone footage, the evidence I had been collecting. He went through it all, his jaw tight as he scanned the footage. "You've got a case, Sam. Big one. This isn't just negligence, it's arson." I nodded, but my mind was on the fire, on the destruction. I wasn't thinking about lawsuits anymore. I was thinking about what they had done. "We need to make them pay for this," I said. We watched as the fire spread to the HOA's clubhouse. The flames hit first, and the windows exploded, sending glass into the air. The building, once their symbol of control and power, was now crumbling in the flames. Cheryl and the others were still trying to manage the chaos. Cheryl, clipboard in hand, shouted orders. But her voice was lost to the roar of the fire. She was running around trying to put out the flames, but it was clear she had lost control. The fire was bigger than any of them had anticipated. Fire trucks arrived, but it was too late. The flames had already consumed the clubhouse, and now it was heading toward the homes of the HOA's members. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. They had dismissed my warnings, thought they were above everything, And now, their so-called perfect neighborhood was burning down. A sheriff's deputy arrived, and Caleb spoke with him, handing over the evidence. I stood back, letting it all sink in. The fire wasn't just a disaster. It was the truth being exposed for everyone to see. The HOA had thought they were above the law, that they could get away with anything. Now the fire had laid bare everything they had tried to hide. Cheryl was standing in the ashes of the clubhouse, staring at the damage. Her face was a mix of disbelief and fear. She had thought she could control the situation. She had thought her authority would save her. But she was just like everyone else now, helpless in the face of the fire's fury. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I just felt the weight of what had been lost, not just for me, but for everyone in this neighborhood who had been under the thumb of the HOA. The fire had taken more than just property. It had destroyed their illusion of control. The aftermath of the fire felt like standing in the middle of a war zone. The smoke had finally cleared, but the damage was done. The HOA's sports field was gone, their clubhouse reduced to a pile of charred rubble. The homes of the board members were smoldering windows blown out by the heat. The neighborhood was covered in ash, the once pristine lawns now burnt and brittle. I watched it all from the edge of my property, feeling nothing but a quiet, hollow kind of relief. The chaos was over, but the damage, it couldn't be undone. Cheryl and the rest of the HOA board were nowhere to be seen, hiding behind lawyers and insurance claims, too scared to face the residents they had taken so much from. I knew the legal battle wasn't over. The county fire marshal had already started investigating, and Caleb was right, this wasn't just negligence, it was criminal. The HOA had violated every safety rule, ignored every fire warning, and now they were going to pay. I'd sent all the evidence to the authorities, the photos, the emails, the drone footage. I wasn't just going after them for the orchard. I was going after them for everything they had done to the community. A week later, the news broke. The HOA was facing serious charges, arson, negligence, destruction of private property. The press was all over it. The county was investigating every part of their operation. Cheryl and Karen's perfect little world was unraveling fast. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The people who had tried to push us around, treat us like we didn't matter, were finally being held accountable. But it wasn't just about them. It was about all of us, about what we had lost and what we could still rebuild. The residents who had been ignored for years, the ones who had felt powerless against the HOA's rules, were finally waking up. They were speaking out, signing petitions, demanding accountability. The worst part for me was seeing my orchard reduced to nothing but ashes. The trees that my grandfather had planted, the ones I had worked so hard to nurture, were gone. I had stood there helpless, watching them burn. I couldn't fix that. I couldn't bring back what had been lost. But there was one thing I could do. I could rebuild. Ellie and I started the next weekend. She was quiet, focused, but I could tell she was hurting. We dug into the ground where the old trees had stood. We planted saplings one by one. Not the same kind of trees this time. I wanted to try something new. Something that would symbolize the fresh start we needed. Over the next few months, the neighborhood changed. Without the HOA holding everyone to impossible standards, people started to talk. They shared their stories, their frustrations. They started helping each other in ways they hadn't before. Neighbors who had never spoken to me started showing up with bags of compost offering to help water the trees, or just sitting together outside chatting. We didn't need the HOA's permission to help one another anymore. There was no longer a need to ask for approval before we planted a garden or fixed a fence. People started taking pride in their homes and in each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. By the time the next spring came around, the orchard was starting to show signs of life again. It wasn't the same, but it was a new beginning, and that's what mattered. Ellie and I sat beneath the new saplings, the ones that had taken root. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw hope in her eyes. The HOA board was gone. Cheryl had moved out of state. Rumor had it she was trying to escape the fallout, but no one knew where. Karen had been forced to file for bankruptcy, and the rest of the board members had either resigned or disappeared. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel any joy in their downfall. But I felt something different: peace. The kind that comes when you stop fighting the system and start building something better. A few months later, the former HOA office, the place where they had made all their shady decisions, was turned into a public park. Not a fancy park with regulations and rules, but a place where kids could play, neighbors could gather, and people could finally breathe. We named it the Rebuild Grove, a tribute to what we had lost and what we had rebuilt. And in the center of that grove, I planted a tree, a lemon tree, the first to grow in the new orchard. A symbol of resilience,